Welcome to the B-Max Sports Podcast.
Angel, we got 30 minutes for the rest of our lives. 30 minutes for the rest of our lives.
Make sure to subscribe on all platforms.
Let's be great. Let's be great.
Hope you enjoy the show.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the podcast. Once again, we have another very informed guest with us today, Dalton Jessup. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing pretty good, Tate. How about you, bro?
I'm doing great. Hutto, how are you doing? You hanging in there?
Fantastic, man. Hanging in there.
You guys have a good 4th?
Yeah, man.
Yeah, I didn't really do much, but it's nice to have some time off work, just be able to hang out around the house. So that's just as good as going to the beach for me.
Exactly
So.
right.
Yeah, I actually went to the beach this past weekend, so just had a chill weekend, or this past week, excuse me, and just had a chill weekend,
Oh yeah, dude, the beach
Some
is so
downtime.
relaxing.
Yeah. One of my favorite things to do is just be at the house and not have anything to do whatsoever. Like everybody wants to go out on these trips and stuff like that, dude. Just let me sit at the house for at least a week and just be able to wake up whenever I want to, get some stuff done around the house and just chill.
for sure.
Absolutely. All right, so Dalton has some very interesting subjects we're going to get into here today. So without further ado, I'm going to let him start it off. What do you want to talk about first, Dalton?
Well, I'm going to start out, and first and foremost, I'm going to thank you guys publicly for having me on. And I've always had a fascination ever since I was young with ancient history, especially pertaining to like humans' role. And I was always fascinated with especially like Egypt and cultures of that. We all know how astronomically amazing some of the feats are that they created. Some of this stuff we don't even know if we could do today.
Right.
And I always thought about that as a young kid, just that's pretty cool. And there was a long time I didn't think about it. And come about a year and a half ago, we all listen to Joe Rogan. If you watch podcasts, you listen to Joe Rogan, or at least know who he is. But he had some guys on, and one of them being a geologist and one of them being a journalist. And these guys, without a doubt, through hard evidence, changed my view on human history as we know it. I think that the evidence they put forward is so substantiary that even I'm going to be here an hour and a half maybe, but in this time I think you guys are going to at least have a different view of how things went down.
All
and
right.
So I guess without further ado, I'll just go ahead and hop into it.
Let's get into it. Let's do
All
it.
right, so basically I'm going to attribute the work. A lot of this is not my original stuff, and I want to put that out there first and foremost. The two guys, the geologist and journalist I spoke of, the geologist is Randall Carlson, guy. He lives in Atlanta. He's been doing this for 30-something years, world renowned. And Graham Hancock, he's a journalist from Britain, and same, he's been walking the walk for this for 25-30 years. And both of these guys, they when I got exposed to their work on Joe Rogan, they were proposing that roughly 13,000 years ago, there were a series of events that happened here in North America. Throughout history, you look and you see places like Mesopotamia and, in the Middle East, they're always included in history. And then you have like the Mayans and stuff like that in South America, but you never really hear much about what was North America's story throughout history. And now I think we know why. These events that happened starting 12,800 years ago was the beginning of a series of events called the Younger Dryas, and this is pretty much widely accepted throughout mainstream science today. And views differ on what exactly happened. Some think it's solar outburst, or what they call coronal mass ejection, where the sun just has burst of heat and causes global climate change basically instantly. And but I think that that the theory that they're going with, and what I believe, is that a series of comets hit the North American ice cap 13,000 years ago. And I'm glad Josh is here, being as religiously knowledgeable as he is, because I think the evidence I'm going to present today, and I'm going to show you guys some pictures. Sadly, the viewer or the listeners won't be able to see it, but they'll be able to hear your guys' reaction, because once you see this, I think it's pretty evident that this is proof that the Great Flood happened.
Right.
And I think when you look at it on a global scale, in the Bible it talks about how God flooded the earth, and I feel like he flooded the earth, but maybe not in a sense that people have been taught to accept. I feel that certain places were flooded more, especially here in North America, and I'll provide evidence for that coming. But floods all around the world because of rainfall, because of sea level rise. At the end of the last ice age, sea level rose anywhere from 300 to 400 foot and sank roughly 10 million square miles of land below the water.
Right.
That's roughly the equivalent of Europe and China was sank below water. Who knows, what was there, who was there.
Right.
So, but the evidence, it suggests that there was a initial smaller impact roughly 12,800 years ago, and this started a chain of events. They believe that the comet hit in the Pacific Northwest. It includes 5 states actually in the United States, mainly though Washington and western Montana, Washington State. And you just see evidence of catastrophic flooding, and most people will ask, well, why don't we have an impact crater or something? We can say, well, that's because scientists do believe that in the Pacific Northwest, the ice sheet during the ice age may have been as 2 miles deep. And so when this comet came in and hit the ice cap, it just instantly melted unconceivable amounts of water.
Right.
Overnight. And when this kind of started a trickle-down effect of events to come, you got to imagine, okay, you take a slug like you put in a shotgun,
right,
and I throw it at you across the room, it's not going to hurt you.
Right.
But if you put it in a shotgun and you shoot it,
it's going to
the
hurt.
damage is, it's extreme. Well, imagine, they believe this first meteor that hit was anywhere from a kilometer to half a kilometer wide, which is roughly a quarter mile wide object, and it's traveling at 70,000 miles an hour. I mean,
right,
you can imagine the
damage,
devastation that it has hitting the earth at 70,000 miles an hour. Well, not only does it melt the water when it hits the ice sheet, but imagine it just hitting and exploding, kind of like a watermelon.
Right.
And what it does is it shoots fireballs essentially into the upper atmosphere, and it rains down like fire over the unglaciated United States, roughly south of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And this was all covered by primal forests, like where we are here, for example, in Georgia. This is 10,000 years ago. Where we are today would have been the equivalent of the forest you would find in Canada. Spruce trees, snow, Arctic weather. That was what was here in Georgia. They even believed, because of the sea level rise, that it could have been like that in Cumberland Island and Tybee, and you have places like that could have been Arctic forest 12,000 years ago. And so basically when these fireballs came down, it set the continent, what wasn't ice, on fire. And there's evidence for this in 20 or 30 major sites across North America. It's called the black mat layer. And you can distinctly look in the sediment, and there's carbon 6 inches to a foot thick of just carbon black soot. It looks like, a campfire.
Right.
And it's just evidence that there was just massive burning like we couldn't expect. There's also, when you have something like that and it hits this ice sheet, you have an amazing amount of water that is lifted into the atmosphere. I mean, it causes global rainfall. And see, this is going to tie a little bit into, I'm going to get into ancient civilizations that were around when this happened, and why I believe that you have this great knowledge 12,000 years ago of some of these places that were built, and why it falls off. Because if you look at pyramids from back then to some of the pyramids that are only 1,000 or so years old, the technology is just, it's not what it was. It's almost like all that got lost, and they're remembering bits of pieces of how to do this.
Right.
And so anyway, when this hit, global temperatures they speculate that they could have dropped anywhere from 18 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit globally in under a year. So you're talking about basically like I was saying earlier, Georgia would have the weather equivalent of New York State or something like that within a year.
Yeah.
And we all know we have really warm weather down here. It's 98 degrees outside right now.
Something like that. Yes.
I mean, we don't have big snowfall or anything like that, and that was definitely what it was back during this time in this area.
So the climate was in Georgia was, like you said, like New York State, and that was from the asteroid meteor striking that.
We'll picture this. This wasn't that big of an object. We'll get to the second comet that I believe hit, because it was a series of events. I think it was a couple smaller ones, and then at 11,600 years ago, there was a massive one. Some people believe it was 2 to 2.5 miles wide.
Goodness.
And the force that comes with these things. Just for example, there was a comet that hit Jupiter back in the 1998. It hit Jupiter. It was 61 miles wide, I believe.
Good God.
Yes.
That's a horse.
The power that it had when it hit Jupiter, to put it in perspective, if you took all the nuclear bombs that we have on Earth today and detonated them at the same time, it would be about a 50th of what this was.
Goodness gracious.
The mushroom cloud of this comet hitting Jupiter was as big as Earth itself.
Goodness gracious.
So we're looking at stuff, if you look in any culture around the world, almost every culture has tales of major catastrophe, especially when it comes to comets. It doesn't matter where you look. And I think there's a reason for that. I think that's because these events happened and there was a very select group of people who survived and lived to tell the tale.
Right.
Because I don't believe I can begin to put into words how different Earth would have been when this happened. I mean, I'm going to show you evidence here. I can go ahead and start transitioning into that a little bit. But, going back to the Pacific Northwest and the flooding, when the second event came around at 11,600 years ago and the supposedly up to 2 mile wide comet hit somewhere on the North American ice cap, you had, like I said earlier, inconceivable amounts of water that were released almost instantly. And what that did is that caused a extreme wave of fresh water to come surging down through North America. And the only thing that we have that is comparable to it that we can visualize is a tsunami. But during our time, tsunamis we've seen have been 40, 50 foot in Indonesia and, places like that. And you've seen the devastation it has.
Right,
Kills
absolutely.
potentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people.
Right.
And the wave that the evidence I'm gonna show you today suggests that there could have been a wave potentially 1,000 foot or higher coming
Holy
across
shit.
the United States, especially Washington State, that area.
Can you imagine looking out your door? Well, let's take it back in time. These guys are probably nomadic at this time, right? What would you think?
Everybody during this time, and we're gonna get into that. I'm gonna tell you about a great civilization that was here that not a lot of people talk about. But yes, 95% of people on Earth were hunter-gatherers, is what they call them, nomadic people. They lived off the land. Especially here in North America, we were believed to be less settled. We don't have, if you look around, we don't have great monuments or pyramids or anything like that really.
Right, so we were more mobile than other civilizations.
Right. We weren't settled. We weren't developing agriculture and just living in one place in general and staying there for a decent amount of time. But
so imagine holy shit, what is that? That's a 64.
That's a 64 foot wave.
Okay, so imagine you've put a fire down for heat that night. You wake up in the morning
and you see
and there is a fucking 1,000 foot wave finna crash on you, dude.
You better just put your hands together and start praying.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
Your time's done.
Yeah, and there's no surviving that, buddy. Holy.
Dude, I can't. When I see guys surfing on stuff like this, I mean, if you want to get like a visual, just go in and type up big wave in Hawaii, because they have. I want to go to Hawaii one day and just actually see this, because these waves and the way that this shows just how powerful the ocean is makes you feel extremely small as a person.
Yeah, and imagine a 1,000 foot one.
It makes you feel like you don't have much
say so in the world.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you feel extremely vulnerable.
We are as humans very vulnerable.
Well, and even over the past maybe 300 years, we became so soft as a civilization.
Without
I mean,
a
you
doubt.
got to think. I mean, July 4th was yesterday. Whenever Washington took his men across the Delaware
on
Christmas Eve, or was it Christmas or Christmas Eve? I believe it was Christmas Eve.
I believe it was Christmas Eve. I believe you're right.
I mean, it was extremely cold. They were breaking up ice. I mean, there's no telling how cold it was. Dude, I won't even walk outside when it's cold to go take the trash out because I don't want to be out there in the. I mean,
right.
We do things now so differently than those guys, and these even farther back, these ancient civilizations that we see. We talk about how you kind of hit on. We don't know how the Egyptians built.
No, we can't.
There's some stuff that we can't.
There's
some stuff that we can't explain. But we also have to think about these people might not have been the same physical shape that we are in. I mean, you look at most of America, the men that you see now are just absolutely blobs compared to what the men were 300 years ago.
Oh, without
These
a doubt.
guys, I mean, I get in my car and drive home and think nothing about it. But if we wanted to go to, you said you went to the beach 300 years ago, if we wanted to do something like that,
You're not going to the beach,
bro. You get your horse and your buggy, and this is a month or two long trip that you're out there in the wilderness. You're exposed to the elements. You're exposed to predators.
Disease, famine, going hungry if there's no food around because you're a hunter-gatherer.
We are so absolutely deluded as human beings today. I mean, we're so soft compared to what these people are. So, yeah, we might think about it and say, dude, how did they do that? But a lot of those guys, there was no jobs that you just went and sat in an office and you sit at your desk and you're typing. Every job back then was physical. And you did
It
not
was surviving.
Yeah, and you didn't get a 8-10 hour workday and say, oh yeah, we got our 40, now we're going home for the weekend.
Yeah.
There was nothing like that. You worked every day,
Right.
I mean, and even mass farming back then. Whenever they had to, I mean, obviously there was not as many people as, I mean, because the amount of agriculture that we have to do today to sustain 340 million people in the United States is just overwhelming.
Right.
I mean, we cannot even produce that much food in the United States. We have to outsource because we just can't do it. They had to do the same kind of stuff. Especially you look at ancient Rome, how advanced they were for the times that they were in. They had to absolutely bust it to keep up with that society, and they didn't have the technology we had today.
No. And that was thousands of people. Imagine how much harder it would be if it was just 20 people.
Yeah.
Because then everybody, you're having to hunt from dusk to dawn just to have food to eat for your
Right.
family. The more people you have, you create a surplus of people being able to, more specialize in jobs instead of, hey, I've got to wake up, I've got to go get firewood, I've got to go get water, I have to hunt and kill something to survive today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're talking two completely different things.
And
Yes.
I was watching a TV show, and it's about these guys who live in the mountains. Some of them are, spread across the United States, and they solely live off of the land. And these guys, there was a guy, and his power is generated through water. He has a hydroelectric something, and the water runs down the creek, runs to the pipe, directs it into this hydroelectric generator, turns the wheel, and that's how he gets his power. And if he wakes up in the morning, power's out, he doesn't call EMC and say, hey, we got some issues. He's got to go out there in the freezing cold
and figure out what's wrong.
Do it.
Fix it.
Then get back to what he was doing, like getting food. These guys go out and trap for weeks at a time, leave their families, go out there and just spending the night under the stars when it's negative 30 degrees outside. don't even like going outside when it's 32 degrees.
Well, picture this. I mean, even farther back, if you look at the time period specifically that I'm talking about, 10, 12,000 years ago, if you were living during that time, especially the men, you woke up in the morning, you gathered as a tribe who was able to hunt, and you had to go hunt down woolly mammoths with spears. I
That's
mean,
insane,
we're
bro.
talking two different completely universes. You
That's
have,
crazy.
and see, you were talking about the jobs. You know, another thing they weren't doing was scrolling Instagram and Twitter. You know,
Yeah.
they were constantly having to figure out and adjust to the life. I mean, and especially the environment. If it came in and the winter was extra cold, I mean, you're potentially going to lose half your village because you don't have the food and you didn't prepare.
Right.
I mean, there's so many more variables that go into living that lifestyle, and we have it so good here with shelter and running water. If something were to happen tomorrow, another comet hit, and we were, 80% of civilization here in the United States died or something happened, then we would the people who would survive would be those people who are already doing it.
Well, and if we
Right.
had to not even just something as significant as a comet, just as like
And
just
EMP.
the grid going down.
Yeah, me and Will were talking about it before we walked in here. The fact that do you know how to read a map?
No.
Do you know how to read a map?
Can't say I do.
Not very well.
If an EMP were to hit tomorrow and we left outside of Lawrence County, we would be lost.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We would be lost. And you could learn it, but it would take years to learn that skill once it's gone. And this is all tying together, and I'm glad you boys are kind of getting it.
Oh,
And,
I love ancient civilization.
This
dude.
is
really do.
gonna go in. I'm gonna start gravitating that way. I don't want to spend too much longer on this subject, but am gonna go ahead and bring up some pictures for you guys just so you can get an idea of how vast this flooding was.
Yeah, let's see it.
Okay, so what I'm gonna show you first is this is a picture taken from 2004 here in Georgia when Hurricane Ivan came through, and whether you go to the beach or a washboarded dirt road here in around town. When it's washboarded, that's the effects of water flowing over it and then slowly trickling out, and it leaves like these ripples.
Right.
And you'll see that on the sand. I mean, you see that all the time riding down dirt roads, or or you see it at the beach
Erosion.
especially.
Yeah.
And what it is the water's flowing down, and like I said, it eventually just slows and seeps into the ground instead of running off. Well, this that I'm about to show you is a picture taken out in Washington State. Now, what you're looking at is the exact same thing, just on a much, much grander scale. I mean, you can see the mountains in the background. You can go to the mountains in the background,
Wow.
and you can trace the high water marks. Like when you're riding down the river, you can see where it's been in the past
Right.
because of just erosion and tearing into the riverbanks. It's the same thing here. You can trace the watermarks. And this is where I was talking about the 1,000-foot wave coming over the United States. And this is fresh water, keep in mind, because there was this 2-mile thick ice sheet.
Right.
And you have something coming at 70,000 miles an hour from space that's burning hotter than anything we can imagine other than the sun.
Right.
And it hits and just melts all this. And, the amount of water that flowed through here, I'm going to have to look and just kind of get an idea. Where was it at? Okay, yeah, so scientists created a word called sverdrup to the only way they use this word today is to track ocean currents, the strength of ocean currents, how fast they are flowing. One sverdrup is 1 million cubic feet of water per second. I mean, just imagine the Gulf Stream ocean current flowing. The water that they tracked that came over this land was 3 million cubic feet per second.
Goodness.
I mean, that is, I think, like 50 times stronger than all the rivers in the world, their flow combined.
That's insane. And that would pretty much wipe out everything.
What would survive that?
Nothing.
Absolutely nothing.
Right.
And see, that picture that I showed you back during this time, that was a forest. But when it came through, every tree, every root, everything was just gone. And the thing is, that valley was carved out, they believe, in just 3 weeks. That water rose and fell and carved that.
That's incredible to think about.
I think that scientists have also speculated that the Grand Canyon was carved out extremely quickly, and they said the way that the layers are just perfectly cut, and how you can literally sit there and just see time unravel just looking at the layers that are cut out of that mountain. And I mean, there's thousands of years of sediment and buildup that created this mountain, and then all of a sudden you have something that is so powerful that it just cuts
like a Mack truck.
It just cuts through it like butter. And if you look at a mountain, it's something that if you've ever stood and looked at one, it's something that you think that is absolutely unmovable.
Right.
Unless you use some kind of explosive, and even using explosives, you have to. There's some parts where you have to actually, when they blow up a mountain, to put like a railroad track down or something like that. You have to move and make your path to where the mountain is weakest. There's some points that you cannot just blow this mountain because it's such an absolute, just unfathomable, kind of even like a symbol of strength, how just absolutely powerful it is. And you just cannot, even though it's just something that's just sitting there.
It's almost like a diamond. It is so hard.
It never moves. But the environment has to move around it. Something as powerful as a hurricane or some kind of natural disaster cannot, a lot of those things cannot, it can wipe everything out. Everything around that mountain is going to be wiped out. But that mountain will still be there.
Right.
And it's just so, the build-up there is so strong that even as humans, as we come along with technology and things like that, we cannot just bend that mountain to our will.
No.
And so to have something like the Grand Canyon that is just so strong and so sturdy, to have something come through and wipe it out in a matter of weeks is amazing.
And see, one thing about the Grand Canyon too, for evidence of it being a very quick occurring thing, is I personally, I'm not a geologist, but I feel like if it took that, thousands of years to carve out, I feel like it would be way wider at the top and skinnier at the bottom, because it flows, and with the natural rising and falling, it's going to erode some of these top layers. But if you have just one ungodly amount of water flowing streamline, like you said, it's like, you know how they can take water and pressurize it and cut through steel beams. That's essentially what you're doing. Yes.
Right.
And I'm gonna go ahead and take that into this next picture. Now, you guys thought the last one was pretty wild. This is this just takes it to a whole nother level. What you're gonna see here, I'm gonna have to zoom in. The picture right here in the middle, Josh, that is a picture of Niagara Falls scaled to what this is. This is called a cataract, and you get this horseshoe shape because when you have a river flowing or a huge body of water, its flowing gets fastest in the middle. That's where it's its strongest. And when it gets outward, the flow becomes weakened. So when it's flowing over a point, it erodes the middle out before the edges. So you get like a horseshoe shape like Niagara Falls. Well, this is the exact scale of Niagara Falls to this place called Dry Falls in Washington State. This, 40 to 50 times larger than Niagara Falls on the border. You can just see it's not even comparable.
No.
It's not even comparable. And just to put it into perspective, the water that flows over Niagara Falls, the discharge, is 1 to 200,000 cubic feet per second of water. The water that came over this was 3 to 400 million cubic feet per second of water. You have to think of a whole ocean flowing over the land near about. And it just carved out, like you said, and this didn't just hit the Northwest. That's just the place you can mainly see it. But they believe that the water from this impact filled the Great Lakes, carved out the Grand Canyon, the Mississippi River, all the way down. That's where this came from. And I do believe that this is the story of the Great Flood. Now, this flooding wasn't this bad globally. Like I said earlier, when that comet hit, it caused immense rainfall. In fact, some older tales, no matter what religion it is, they all say that there was times where there was 5 or 6 years of darkness because it rained every day. And moving into Egypt, that the evidence shows for this rainfall around the world. We all know where Giza is now. It's just desert. There's nothing around. There's no rain hardly there ever. Maybe 12 inches in a year, most. There was a doctor from the Boston University. His name's Dr. Robert Schoch. He went to Egypt and studied the Sphinx and was looking at the erosion around the bottom of the Sphinx. And conventionally, scientists and archaeologists have explained that as wind and sand erosion. Well, a lot of people don't know this, but the Sphinx and the pyramids, about a third of the year at least, are covered by sand because deserts move. They don't really look the same 6 months at a time because the sand moves and the wind and it carries in sediment and such as that. Sandstorms, they shift the mound, the sand mounds. Well, that the Dr. Robert Schoch, he concurred that it was impossible for rain or for wind to have eroded the Sphinx the way it was, and he attributed it to ungodly amounts of rainfall that it came. And there hasn't been rainfall in the Nile Valley since 11,000 years ago, which is the spike at the second of what they call the Younger Dryas. It's when they believe this big comet hit. And so it just makes sense, on one end of the world, in the western or in the eastern hemisphere, you have the comet hit in North America and it affects us. But around the world, they don't have the flooding we have, but they have rainfall, and with the subsequent rise of ocean levels, 300 to 400 foot, that's going to flood all the rivers. Land is just going to go underwater overnight. I mean, you could wake up one morning and be 50 foot underwater.
Right.
And I think it just, it ties into the fact that we can't envision how catastrophic this flood was. And I do believe that Noah, because we can all agree that the ark, if you are a Christian, if you believe in Christianity, the ark took Noah 300 years to build, 400 years to build.
I don't know exactly the time frame, but it was whenever God came to Noah and told him, "Hey, this is about to happen." Noah was a lot younger man than he was whenever it actually did occur.
Right.
So I'd have to look it up and see, because I can't remember off the top of my head. But it did. I mean, you can look up the dimensions online and it'll tell you. There's actually it may be in Kentucky, they built a life-size ark, and they built it exactly to the dimensions of what the scripture says that God told him, because God instructed Noah exactly how to build this thing.
Right.
He told him exactly, and I mean, just how massive this ship was, really.
If we were to recreate it today, they're not sure that it could survive out in deep waters. I mean, because wooden boats, once they get to a certain size, they lose a lot of their strength. And because there's just more, I guess, like pressure on and like torque in the beams and stuff. I'm not really sure, but what I was getting to though is we would all agree that Noah had immense knowledge to be able to build such a massive ship.
Absolutely.
I mean, it was, according to historians, this thing could have been 400 or 500 feet long. I mean, it's huge, and I believe that ties into. I had this, or these guys present it, but they believe, and I do too. They have convinced me that Noah may have been a part of the first truly great and modern civilization. And just hypothetically, put ourselves back in the time of post Noah's flood. If someone showed up on a 500-foot ship and you were, like we said, hunter-gatherers, what would you think of this guy?
He's the smartest man alive.
I mean, you know what I'm
He's
saying?
all-knowing.
It would just blow your mind.
Absolutely.
And I think, this is in my opinion, and nobody else has to believe it, but I think that Noah is one of the last few survivors of the civilization that built the pyramids, that built the, some of these great structures that just can't be explained.
Right.
And it makes sense because, like I said, Noah obviously was very intelligent. I mean, he had God helping him build it, but he knew he knew the architecture. He knew how to structure things. Not only that, it's quite possible he had great navigation skills. When the water rose, he could have had, it could have randomly taken him, but he could have had, good navigation skills. And, but I'm gonna, let me see here.
And to answer your question, this website says that most theologians believe that it took him about 120 years to build the ark.
Right. Yes. So I mean, mass undertaking of. I'm sorry, I know the notebook's giving off. I had to bring a notebook though. This is too much information to keep. I'm not Will Dyers, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not a walking encyclopedia. I can't store everything in my head. So.
I can't either. Don't feel bad.
I just wanted to make sure I had covered everything on that. Okay, so with Egypt, currently it's believed to be by historians 4,000 to 4,000 years old, or 4,000 to 4,500 years old, excuse me. And like I was saying earlier, with the erosion, Dr. Robert Schoch was absolutely convinced that this was rainfall. So just take yourself and say, okay, it was 10 to 12,000 years ago, the civilization that built the Great Pyramids and the Sphinx. This event, I believe, for the most part, wiped them out. Not because they were flooded like we were here in North America. It wasn't that. But with the global temperatures dropping 20 degrees, you have to imagine that agriculture almost comes to a halt.
Absolutely.
You're not going to be able to grow crops in cold weather.
Right.
And especially not to feed the masses of people. Because let's be honest, it took more than just 100, 150 people to build the pyramids.
Absolutely.
I mean, me and Will have talked, and we speculated there could have been hundreds of thousands, if not a million people, the undertaking of this project.
Right.
I mean, because the Great Pyramid of Giza weighs 3.6 million tons, I think.
God.
I mean, we can't even imagine something that heavy. And so I don't believe that it was a small society at all. I believe these people were very smart. They knew how to organize a workforce at the very least. And not only that, they had a good enough agriculture to feed all these people and keep them alive.
Right.
And I believe that was wiped out when this came through. And I think that leads directly to the pyramids losing. You would think if you were experimenting and building with something over time, you get better at it.
Right.
It would make sense if something happened and that knowledge was lost, then you lose all that progress you had made in architecture or whatever it may be.
Right.
So I definitely believe that had something to do with the disappearance of this civilization. And just to give you guys an idea of how smart these guys were, a lot of this stuff, for whatever reason, when you have somebody who's taught something and given a master's degree, especially in science or something or history, to tell them that they are completely wrong, they're not going to accept that at all. You know what I'm saying? If you spent your whole life believing and teaching, a lot of these professors teaching this stuff, you're not just going to change your thoughts about where we come from and the origin of humans.
Right.
So I believe it takes an open-minded person to look at this. And but these people, man, they were so smart. In certain ways, I do believe that they were more advanced than we are, especially when it comes to architecture for the amount of resources and knowledge that they had, and when it comes to astronomy. I'm about to lay some stuff on you that it's no coincidence these guys were way smarter than we give them credit for. So if you take the measurement of the Great Pyramid of Giza and you multiply the base of the Great Pyramid by 43,200, and I'll get to that. That's a special number. I'll get to that. But if you multiply the base times the 43,200, you get the equatorial circumference of the Earth. Exactly. So they knew the basic diameter of the Earth. If you take the height of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, you get the exact polar radius of the Earth from pole to pole.
Mm-hmm.
So these guys knew all the way back then the exact size of the Earth, almost down to pinpoint accuracy, which to me, that is no small feat at all.
How would you even go about getting that kind of gaining that kind of knowledge back then?
And at that point too, they had not moved out as a civilization, or humanity itself was kind of gridlocked in
Mesopotamia, in Turkey, Egypt. These are the places where this civilization once lived, and like you said, they were kind of confided to that.
Yeah. So and they had no idea how vast the world was, because like we said, it wasn't like they had some kind of Christopher Columbus or Ponce de Leon where they went out and journeyed and got in these boats and went and looked around, and because number one, we don't even know if at the time the oceans were even connected, because over these thousands of years the Earth has greatly changed, and
without a doubt.
So you don't even know if there was even a possibility for them to leave this area.
That is very possible.
For them to be able to calculate the size and the circumference of the Earth and not even know what the Earth was.
Look, I can't even do, with all the resources and shit I have now, there is zero chance that me myself could go out and figure out exactly the size of the Earth, the distance around the equator, none of that shit. There's no chance I'm doing that.
Well, the bigger statement to that is I don't believe the smartest people that we have in astronomy, given the resources they had back then, could either.
No, exactly. I don't even know how they could.
That's what's astounding is
Right.
I think even though they had way less quote-unquote technology, what we see as technology being cell phones and the internet, I believe they had some kind of different technology where they were way more versed in this stuff than we are.
And you kind of hit on the point of how you think they were a lot smarter than we were, and more
in different ways.
For a lesser term, just more educated. But they had to, like you said, they didn't have the cell phones. I can get on this laptop here and look up any bit of information I want to, and it will be given to me. These guys, you had people whose only job was just to be thinkers, and they sat, and to figure something out, they had to, and they didn't even have, at this point, there was no law of gravity. There was no Einstein's theory of relativity. There was nothing like that. That had not been figured out, or at least it wasn't recorded. That
maybe they had. Who knows?
They could. They could have. And with society being wiped out like that, a lot of these deep thinkers, a lot of these people who may have had this information, and you hit on earlier that the older pyramids were not built exactly like the newer ones were, and
they're way better.
And the older pyramids were more well built, and so a lot of this information they had, a lot of these guys who, were the people, the great minds of construction in that day, the great minds of agriculture. Architecture in that day. It's very possible that they could have been wiped out. And once they say, okay, we've built our civilization back up again, we want to start building great masses. At the same time, you have to think they did not have number one, the manpower that they used to have, and then number two, they didn't have the mind power that they used to have, because they started over. It was like all of a sudden you hit a reset button, and just imagine it like you are. We're all grown people. We have our experiences. We've learned from mistakes. We've learned from trial and error that has brought us to a point that we are today. Imagine you still being a grown man and then just somebody hitting a reset button and you lost all of that.
Yeah.
And you went back to kind of like an infant mind form. This is basically what happened to them. Other than from what biblical teachings show us is that Noah and his family. And Noah probably, we were talking about Noah was probably a very well versed builder and carpenter. So that's what he was really, really good at.
Right.
And that's what he put all of his time into. And he had been doing all of his life. And at this point, human beings live to be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old.
Yes. If you believe in the Bible, then in the Bible it states several people lived 950 years.
And so you got to think, he devoted his whole life to carpentry and woodwork. When would he have time to put in building, like making these great sculptures and great just monuments out of brick and bricks that they made with clay and mud? You lose at some point when a civilization is wiped out. You lose parts of it.
Right.
It's just like over time it gets diluted, because the reason that we have had people write books and write things down about time is because who is going to be around 2,000 years later to be able to tell that story? If me, you, and Tate went to the woods and we go out and we're camping and there's a massive bear attack and none of us survive, the story dies with us. And so essentially, there were parts of the world and most of the world that literally its entire story died with the flood. And there was nothing. There was nothing that came out of that civilization because there was no one to tell about it.
Well, some things survived, but people today just account it as myths or tales or, fairy tales. And say, I'm going to get into one in a minute. And, obviously you guys know about it, but the lost city of Atlantis. Most people would say, or has been, that's just a fairy tale, or they assume, or, they categorize it with the same as aliens or, some craziness. But I feel like there is some relevance to this. If you look into Plato's account of Atlantis, he said very specifically that his ancestor Solon, who had lived in 600 BC, had been exiled to Egypt. And when he was there, he came into contact with Egyptian priests. And the priests then told him of Atlantis, and they told him that it was the epicenter of knowledge and just the ability, knowledge and technology. It was the center. I envision it, me personally, you don't have to, but I envision it as like a university or somewhere people came to learn vast knowledge and, got away from hunter-gatherer society, or maybe got that knowledge and took it back to their people to improve quality of life.
Right.
And, but he very specifically said that Atlantis was sunken by the seas 9,000 years prior. Well, 9,000 plus 600 plus 2,000 years where we are today, that's 11,600 years. The exact precise date of the comet hitting and oceans rising 400
So
feet.
where was Atlantis located at exactly? Do you know?
Somewhere in Mesopotamia, near the Tigris and Euphrates River is where they believe. But nobody really knows.
Right.
It's all speculation. We weren't around back then. But, Plato has been widely known as being a pretty honest guy, especially when it comes to history. And, people still use his work today for for their own projects and this and that. So, but he very specifically said that it was 11,600 years ago that it was sunk by sea. And that to me is just interesting because that coincides with a 400-foot rise in sea level. Because look at, for example, when Columbus and others settled the Americas. where were all the first major cities? Along the water. They were on the coastlines or
Right.
on the rivers. Well, 400-foot rise, all of that's going to be gone within weeks. I mean,
Right, absolutely.
and if it's 400 feet below the ocean now, we're not going to be able to explore it. But
Right.
it is known that the ocean rose that much and sank, like I said, 10 million square miles of land. Atlantis could have been there.
Oh,
And-
absolutely. Very possible.
And I just think it's just insane to me that all these dates coincide with each other. And, you know, because you can look at one piece of information and say, oh, that could be an anomaly. But once you get 50 anomalies, it's not an anomaly
no more.
It's not. And
Right.
and I think that's what we're looking at here. And, you know, there's been pieces. These guys, like I said, they've been doing this for 30 years. And once again, this is their work, and I'm just the messenger. But I feel like this completely changed my view on the origin of humans. And I think they've got a lot of it right. But the evidence versus when they started to now, I mean, it's just mounting every
Right.
day. I saw something just last week where they discovered some kind of site in, I want to say it was India, that they believe could have been from the same time period, 10, 12,000 years ago. And there's definitely, I got to get into this because this is some of their main thing. There's a site that was discovered in Turkey. It's called Göbekli Tepe. And this site, it defies all conventional wisdom about the understanding we have of the world, and I think this is the proof that these people were just geniuses. So to start, we don't know how old the site is. They can't date it, but what they have dated is the time that it was deliberately buried. They know now because where it's at is a very sandy area, and it sits on top of a hill, the site in Turkey, and it has been filled in with big rocks and dirt. And they know that it was purposefully filled in because the sediment that is on top of this hill is not found for like another 10 or so miles away. So they know that this stuff was deliberately brought in to bury this thing. 13,000 years ago is when it dates to. Well, that's 200 years before the first thing. It's almost like they knew it was coming. And I'm telling you, the depth at which these guys understood our solar system, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the precession of the equinox. Do you guys know what that is? Okay, the precession of the equinox is a 25,970 year process, and that is how long it takes Earth to do a full circle through the solar system to get back. It's basically Earth's orbit through the solar system. 25, almost 26,000 years. Every 72 years is 1 degree of the equinox. So think of it as a dial. 1 degree is 72 years. Well, these guys were so smart when it come to astronomy that they could predict the sky, by the fixed constellations, they could predict the sky 200,000 years in the future or 200,000 years in the past with precise accuracy, because they use the solar eclipses, because when it does that you can't see the sun, but it's directly 180 degrees without doubt. So they can track using lunar eclipses, or it's either lunar or solar eclipses, but they can use an eclipse to track and know the sky 20,000 years in the future based on where the constellations will be. I mean, these guys, they had knowledge that we couldn't do today. I mean, we simply couldn't.
Well, and I think one thing to note about that is how much longer they had to think about stuff like this, because they did live longer than we did. You were talking about it takes 75 years, 72 years to make 1 degree. Human beings do not. I mean, that's around the average life expectancy. So we don't get that opportunity to. A lot of us will not see events like that happen.
Well, you have to think, it's a 26,000 year process. You have to observe the sky for a really damn long time.
Yeah.
To get that well of knowledge to understand that process. I mean, I don't believe they were looking at it for 26,000 years and guided. I believe that they just looked at it so long and tracked it that they just I don't know. It's so hard for us to envision how they had these knowledges back then, because we as humans now, we think we are the pivotal, we are the best humans to ever walk, the most advanced,
at least the peak of
the
knowledge.
peak of humans, yes. But in a lot of ways, like I said earlier, I don't think we are, and I think you guys agree. I think we're every day becoming more fragile as a society.
Yeah, absolutely.
Way more fragile. And it's to the point now where I've had discussions, me and Will have talked, what is the one thing that we've built in modern times that would survive? Do you guys know? Mount Rushmore. That's the only thing you would know that we were here, that we've left. The rest of it is all digitally stored. We don't even push people to write books anymore. If something were to happen tomorrow, 10,000 years from now, they would not know we were here. I mean,
yeah.
And me and Will had a conversation about this out there. We definitely need to trend towards different ways of thinking. Like you said, these guys, they had a lot more time to think, but it's because they actually cared to delve into that. Nobody now wants to learn about this stuff. There's very few people who are actually down to think this deeply and question the things they've been taught, because that's what the problem is. A lot of people, they take information handed to them and they never question it.
Well, right. And I think that kind of delves in. There's a saying that is, tough men create good times create weak men create hard times. And I think that's what we're kind of understanding with this coronavirus, or just, I mean, even something much more serious like some kind of pandemic that was actually killing a substantial percentage of the human population, because I think we found out the coronavirus is like 98.7 or 98.8% survival rate. So when you look in terms of statistics, this disease was not that deadly. We're in a point where hard men did create good times. And now we are in the chapter of United States history where the good times created weak men.
Absolutely.
And so I don't even know if we care to, at this point, if we care to even make that impact on society to let them know that we were here. Because, like you were saying, back then, I mean, obviously these were extremely tough men, and they had a desire to let people know that they were there. And when you were talking about the only thing that we would leave behind that would survive any kind of like natural disaster is Mount Rushmore. That's the one thing. And you look at all of our great accomplishments as Americans, like the Empire State Building,
Los Angeles, 10 million people in a damn circle,
in a desert bowl.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we had realized, because we have lived life. I mean, the past 100 years, barring the Great Depression, we've lived life fairly, especially within the past 50 years. We've lived life after World War II, Korea. We've lived life fairly easily, because in my life the only tragic incident or something that's hit close to home was 9/11.
Right.
And that's the only thing that we've had to deal with. And I mean, at the time, people our age really didn't have to deal with it, because I was in kindergarten.
I was 3, about to turn 4 years old.
Holy shit, I'm old. I was in like 4th grade.
I was in like kindergarten, kindergarten or 1st grade, and I remember they gathered us into the lunchroom, and they have, back then we had the big TVs mounted on the walls. It wasn't like a flat screen. It was the
100-pound box TVs.
And they sat there and they had the news running. and you have 300, 400 kids sitting there watching the second plane go into the tower. And at the time, obviously, we didn't understand it because we don't know what's happening because we were in kindergarten. I mean, I was 6 years old when that happened. So we really and truly, as our generation as Americans, we have never experienced, and I think that's why everybody really freaked out about coronavirus so bad, is because we've lived in these times that are so easy.
It's so safe.
And it's so safe, and it's so simple for me to get up. And I mean, when there is no complications from me getting from my house to Tate's house, barring some kind of human error or wreck. So, and it is so extremely safe for us to live now that we don't realize how absolutely fragile we are as human beings.
Not at all.
And if something happened tomorrow, our greatest accomplishments, like the World Trade Center, was a massive building. They were massive buildings. I mean, I've never seen, because I've never been to New York, and I've never really been to any really, really big cities. Other than like Atlanta, but still
Atlanta dwarfs in comparison to some of these cities. I mean, there's a lot of people, but as far as structurally,
I mean, and then you see those buildings just commence to rubble right before our eyes. And those were structurally sound buildings.
And it took a plane.
Yeah, and so whenever you look at the things that we've built, the great things that we've built can absolutely be wiped out. And if something happened like some kind of just massive storm that just destructed everything, we wouldn't have anything left.
I believe scientists say that within 6,000 to 7,000 years, everything we've built would have returned to the ground, except for Rushmore. There wouldn't be cars, there wouldn't be buildings, there would be no proof that we ever existed except for 4 faces on a cliffside. I mean, and then you look at places like Egypt and like this Göbekli Tepe. I'm going to show you guys a picture of it in a minute and give you some more information on it. But these guys knew that these catastrophes happened. They didn't ignore it like we do today in modern society and just say, it happens every quarter million years. We don't need to worry about it. These guys knew these things happened, and you can't convince me otherwise that while the Egyptians and stuff were building these pyramids and some of these other great structures, that they weren't sitting there saying, we're building this partially because 10, 20,000 years down the road, we want people to look and say, there was somebody here. And we don't do that today.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, even you look at what's going on with Mount Rushmore right now, there are people who want to sandblast it off the side of the mountain. Because there's a certain group, and I mean, I honestly, I think it's a small group of people that with the rise of technology makes their voice seem like it's a lot bigger than it really is. They want to wipe off our only sustainable monument to show that we as American people were here. And that's
why do they want to do that? Do you know their reason behind
political?
One reason is,
imagine that.
One reason is that 2 of the figures were slave owners.
Okay, here's my problem with this, and I know this is off on a tangent, but if you ignore history, you want to wipe that shit off from what I'm seeing, they want to forget about what happened. If you don't acknowledge history, you're bound to repeat it. And you've got to look, this is a sign of how fucking far we've come as a society here in America. We went from having slaves to now we've had our first, just a couple years ago, we had our first black president. That's how far we've come as a society. And when you want to take these monuments down, then you're bound to forget what they stood for, how far we've come as a society, and you're bound to repeat yourself. That's my personal opinion.
I think we've already forgotten because they want to take down statues of Abraham Lincoln.
He's the one that made the Emancipation Proclamation and freed slaves.
The man who pushed us into this direction that we took.
He led the charge against the Confederacy.
And
Absolutely.
and you have a man who went against social norms and said, hey, what we're doing right now is not right. And he was one of the main individuals who took, like he said, took the charge against what he believed was morally wrong.
Right.
And now, a couple hundred years later, we have people who either, one, do not know who that man is. They can look at a statue of him and not know. And I think that shows how just absolutely dilapidated our education system is now. And either they look at him and they say, I don't know who that is, or they don't care to learn who it is. And whenever you look at every major society, that places like Venezuela, places like Germany during the rise of Adolf Hitler,
The Third Reich.
the first thing that they do is start wiping out history in its tracks.
Yeah, and you're bound to repeat it.
And I don't think I don't know.
Not to interrupt you, sorry, but
Go ahead.
the Romans burning down the Library of Alexandria.
Yeah.
They were trying to erase the history because they didn't want people to remember that. They wanted to remember our history.
Well, and I think that this situation with them wanting to pull down statues of Abraham Lincoln just shows us how quickly we do forget. And that these people who want to rise to power, these people who want to make you, basically force you to forget our history, forget just incredible places in history that we need to be able to learn from. Because the best thing about making mistakes in life is that you can sit there and make a benchmark for, hey, I did this did not work out for me, this wasn't right, or I made a really big mistake, and you learn from it.
Right.
That's the best thing as human beings. I don't want to make mistakes, but obviously we're human beings, we are flawed. You don't want to make mistakes, but at the same time, the only way that you can grow as a human being is to make mistakes.
Correct.
And to make bad decisions, so that in the future you can make better decisions. You can make more educated decisions. That you have something to fall back and look on to. And I think we miss out on that because, like I said, there's people in this country that don't even know how many stars are on the flag. There's people in this country who do not know who Abraham Lincoln is, who do not know who George Washington was or is. And if we start forgetting where we came from, and these men who, like Abraham Lincoln, who took charge and said, we as Americans need to realize that slavery is wrong, and this is how we're going to change it, and this is morally where our country needs to shift to. If we start forgetting that, like Tate said earlier, you are bound to repeat yourself. And that's what scares me about, I mentioned in the last podcast with Jackson, the Venezuelan girl who came, and I don't know if she lived in Venezuela or lives in Venezuela or has moved to America or something like that, but she talked about how she is seeing the fall of her country and seeing what happened to Venezuela. She's seeing it starting to happen in America. And she was basically warning everybody, this is what's happening. We need to look at the bigger picture. Because I think it's ridiculous that since we, as a people, in this time frame, are arguing over something as petty as race. I think that it's actually kind of small-minded of us just to have to sit here, and this is something that we have to go over. And that we have to go over that your skin color does not determine what kind of person you are.
Well, the sad thing is there's people out there who still believe that there is a difference between, and while that number is growing smaller and smaller, there's still a lot of people who do believe that you're different because of how you look. And it is sad that we still have to go over this, and this is still a problem. And I'm all. It needs to be fixed. Absolutely. I have family who isn't 100% Caucasian, and for somebody to be judged for something that's literally just a pigmentation in your skin.
I think we're trending in the right direction, though.
Oh, absolutely. We've come so far.
Yeah, I think we are trending in the right direction.
Society always evolves, and we're definitely on the right track.
I think it's the wise young individuals who are taking this to where we need to be. People who, our age, who are sitting here doing the same things, not necessarily recording a podcast, but having these tough conversations, because there are a lot of tough conversations that have to be had about society now.
Absolutely.
Well, and I think that's something that scares me about this, our generation and the generation younger than us, is because they're afraid to have these conversations because they're afraid to offend someone. And they're afraid to have these conversations because they don't want to be publicly shamed. They don't want to be judged on how they think. And if we go to a singular way of thinking where everybody in America thinks the same, we will never be able to have discussion. And discussion is how you grow as a country, how you grow as a civilization.
Exactly.
In order to grow, you have to question things. Me and Will Dyers had a 2-hour conversation about this other night on the phone, how no matter if it's religion or academics, everybody just takes in this information from authoritative figures and never questions it. They say, I was taught this. That's like, you have a lot of people who, I think at least, especially when it pertains to, the race thing, a lot of that's taught from the parents.
Yeah.
And they, if you teach your kids something and you're a parent, they're going to listen to you because they believe, when you're small, you believe everything your parents say.
Absolutely.
And then it's the same thing when you're coming up through school and everything your teacher says. And let's be honest, you need to question what your preacher says, not in a bad way, but you need to analyze both sides before you interject your point, because even if I don't agree with you at all on a subject, you might say something that it'll at least help make my argument better. For me to not listen to you is, I might miss an opportunity to make my argument better.
Right.
And I think that's the problem nowadays. You have people who just, they wake up, they don't give a shit about furthering, their views on their, whether it be morally or, anything. I mean, they don't wake up and question things. They just accept it. This is how life is. I wake up, I go to my job, I come home, I go out and drink beer on the weekends, and this is just how I die. But you'll never truly get you'll never get deeper wisdom doing that. I think you have to sit back at some point in your life, and we all know people. I could name drop a bunch of them, but I'm not. I don't want to get B-Mac over here in trouble.
Hey, I'm not worried about it.
But I mean, we got people our age, man. You see them, and they never grow up. They're doing the same things, being just as reckless as we were. Tate, me and you, I've never hung out with Josh too much, out on the weekend stuff. But Tate, me and you've had some wild stories.
We do, buddy.
But there's people, we've done grown up from now.
Oh,
I mean, I still go out and have a good time every now and again. There's people I see it's every weekend, 4 or 5 nights a week. They're just going out, and they think they're living the life, but they're not tearing themselves down, but they're not growing. They're just stagnant.
Exactly.
They're just stagnant.
Well, I mean, I think if you are stagnant that you are actually tearing yourself down. I mean, I think if you're stagnant as a person, or you're stagnant,
I can agree with that.
Because yes, there was a time where all I wanted to do was to do what Josh Hutto wanted to do. And every weekend I was out going to try to find a different party, going to try to find something to get into that really didn't grow me as a person. And that's kind of why I'm really excited about getting guests on the podcast, because me and Tate are people who we really like to talk. We like to learn things. We like we like to have conversation, and that's part of the reason that we enjoy podcasting so much. and I've enjoyed these past 3 podcasts. I've enjoyed them more than when it was just me and Tate.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
Tate and I think a lot on the same level, and we enjoy the same things. We enjoy sports, and we enjoy talking about the same things. But it kind of did put us in a stagnant place where it was just me and Tate talking back and forth to each other. And if Tate and myself just went off in a corner and all we did was talk to each other and all we did was hear each other's positions on A, B, or C, or only discussed issues with each other, eventually we're not going to have anything else to talk about. And that's what makes me so excited about having more people on here, is because we get people like you come in here and this is something that you've been thinking about for a long time.
Well, I've been thinking about, but like I said twice already, it's not my work. But these guys they put it in a way to me that I now see it in a whole different light.
Well, and just because it's not your work and you didn't do the research, the reason these guys do this is so people can learn. And you've obviously taken advantage of their free information that they've given out.
Well, see, that's like my mama joked the day before yesterday. She was like, "You weren't worried about, you're using their information. They saying you're plagiarizing." I'm like, this is what these guys want, this information out. They want this paradigm shift to take place, because I'll be honest with you, so much of what kids are getting taught, especially in school nowadays about history, is bullshit.
Yeah.
I mean, it's how they want to portray it in a way that makes their interest of more valuable. And some of this stuff, it goes against the grain, but it's not like I haven't brought evidence. Them pictures I showed you guys, what more do you need to look and say that
there was some kind of catastrophic event?
We can't even grasp it, how then that just goes back to the beginning. That we kind of got off on a tangent and everything, and I'll try to wrap up, here in a few minutes. But it just goes back, we need to question things.
Yep. And there's a saying that history was written by the zebra for the zebra, and that the lion is never spoken about. And what that means is that when you look at the African safari, the big player in Africa is the lion, because he is the top predator. And a zebra is low on the totem because they're not very smart. They have a herd mentality. They're going to do whatever the herd does. They're going to be followed around. And whenever they see something happen, and whenever something happens to them, they don't know the big picture of what's going on. They just look at what's going on now. And so comparing human beings to the zebra is that there is some big player in every situation. But the zebra, which is human beings, or a group, say Americans, American history is written by Americans. And we have to be able to look outside the broad scope of what we think is popular knowledge or
mainstream belief.
Mainstream belief. We need to start looking outside of the box, because if we don't look at other people's history and we don't look and start studying the past, like Tate said, we are bound to repeat it.
Absolutely. And see, that's like, I think the U.S. government spends $15 to $20 million a year on comet research and stuff like this. If one of them came tomorrow, we'd wish we'd have spent every dollar we had on it.
No, absolutely.
And, it's a shame that you guys remember, what was it, 2008? There was the one that flew over Russia. You remember? And it lit up the skies in broad daylight. And there was all these dash cams that had this thing come over at Russia. It may not even been that long. It may have been like 2012 or 13. But as it is, we've already forgot about it.
Right.
But, stuff like this happens all the time, and it's irresponsible of us for not to at least take a look at it and say, hey, these things have posed a extreme danger to our history. And I just want to add too, and what we should all think about is in the past 250,000 years of recorded history, we are in the longest time now without a major catastrophe on the Earth by we're thousands of years overdue for a major catastrophe on this Earth. And the fact that we're the first civilization to, if we wanted to, we could do something about it if we put the resources there. And we're not. We don't even give it, the blink of an eye. And I just think that's crazy for something that if it hit tomorrow,
we're all gone.
We're all gone.
But do you think that it's even something that we need to, I wouldn't say waste our time on, but to delve into something and put a lot of time and effort into something there's no way we can control? Because
they know for a fact that they can move them. If we have enough time, if we were to put more resources into it, we could nudge them into a safer orbit where they're not going to come. I didn't really get to this just because we kind of got off a little bit, but they believe that this comet and many others that have hit come from the Taurid meteor stream. Well, we're actually just coming out of the Taurid meteor stream now. We pass through it twice a year, once in late June, early July, and once in November. And this thing is to believe, scientists now know that there's over 1,000 extinction level comets in this thing, and we pass through it twice a year every year. I mean, chances are eventually it might not be an earth killing one, but you're liable to have hit one that, if you had a 1/4 mile wide comet hit Los Angeles, it would kill 10 million people. Like that. And nobody, we're the first society that could do anything about it, and we don't even care to venture there. And I believe that they said that you can either nudge them, or they said, you can paint one side of it where the sun's rays, it causes it to heat and causes the orbit of it. I'm not a,
but that would make sense.
A major genius like that. But you know what I'm saying? We could do something. And the fact that nobody's looking at it is, I feel like it's irresponsible.
Yeah, that's mind blowing. Nobody's looking at it.
But here, I got a few more things, and then we can wrap this joker up if you guys want to. So going back to the Göbekli Tepe for a minute. This site has, I'll show you guys a picture while I'm talking about it. It has hundreds of these T-shaped pillars with 3D carvings on them. So a lot of people, they don't get what 3D means, okay? When you put your finger in wet concrete, that's what most people think it is, but these people carved it around the picture. So they carved the rock out around what they wanted to show, which is way harder to do than just drawing in something.
Absolutely.
So I'll just show you. This is a picture of it, and them are all like 20 to 50 ton rocks that they have. They're 30 foot high, some of them, and this is in Turkey at this place. And one of the pillars is really interesting. It has these carvings on it. Here at the top, you can very easily see that there's like these handbag. It almost looks like a suitcase ordeal. Well, this site is dated to 12,000 years ago, and now that they're discovering sites all over the world, in South America, India, Indonesia, they found sites with these handbags, the same exact handbags on them. So that draws a big question of either these people were in contact with each other, or they somehow traveled and spread the word of this technology. And the origin story of the Olmecs in South America is really interesting. Well, actually, let me go back. So, roughly 10 years ago, there's uncontacted tribes all over. Well, they contacted a tribe in the Amazon in South America that found Australian Aborigines DNA in their blood. And if you believe the story of the peopling of the Americas, it's that people came from Siberia down the Bering Strait through Alaska, California, and into South America. Well, if that was the case, then you would have that DNA pop up all down through there, but you don't. It's just in the Amazon and just in Australia. And that would lend to a civilization came by boat and settled there. Well, 12,000 years ago, nobody believed that there was a civilization capable of doing that. But the origins of the Olmecs specifically says that they came from a land with vast knowledge and technology by ship to this land, and they were showed by these super geniuses the best places to settle, the best places that they're going to have to farm. And it all links up. It almost seems like we were talking about it earlier, when this event happened, it was like 20 or 30 people around the world survived with the great knowledge of this architecture, this astronomy, and, just stuff that these other people who were, you had these super elite smart people, and the rest, I don't want to say dumb, but nomadic people, they didn't know any of this. These people would have looked like gods to them because they just had knowledge of everything, it would have seemed like.
Right.
And so I believe you see this system of ideas popping up all around the world that suggests that there was a great civilization that was way before we thought. And that it was just wiped out by a massive comet. And that's why, there's a long break in history during that time at the end of the Ice Age. And I think that's why. I think because what happened, the forces released on Earth were comparable to what's going to happen during the rapture. I mean, I believe it is that level type of event that happened. I mean, just immense, cataclysm. So,
yeah.
But
well, that would certainly make sense. Absolutely.
But I think that's about it. We can kind of just come to a close. Just kind of want to get your guys' thoughts on. Especially because we talked about it, I feel like more so. How do you feel, especially Josh, you with your religious knowledge? How do you feel this pertains to the biblical story, and what are some questions that you might withdraw? Because I want to say I'm not guaranteeing this all to everything I said today to be 100%. I just know there's a lot of evidence that would lead to believe that. Personally, I believe that the testament of the old, or the timeline of the Old Testament, could be off a little bit, and I believe that some of this evidence lends to that.
Well, if you do read into the biblical teachings, the reason the Great Flood did happen is because God was punishing a unsovereign earth,
right?
And it doesn't really show. It just says that there was a great rain for 40 days and 40 nights.
Right.
And it never really says anything about some kind of great catastrophe or comet hitting the earth. But who knows how God could have used that. I mean, he could have very well have used that comet hitting somewhere where there was no civilization, where there was no people, to create that. Because obviously, if something was so hot and going at the speed that you say this comet was going and hit an iceberg, it would create instant water vapor.
It would look like the heavens had opened up.
It would create instant water vapor, which would, from what we know about how rainfall occurs, the water vapor would have gone into the clouds and collected, the particles would have mashed together, and that's what creates rain.
Right.
Something so catastrophic like that, and the amount of water vapor and the amount of precipitation
with the sea level rise, also,
as I say,
400 feet is a lot of water.
That amount of water vapor, if it was as catastrophic as these guys think it was, could have very well been what caused that rain for 40 days and 40 nights.
Exactly.
So it definitely could. It doesn't really make clear in the Bible how the rain did come about, but it also doesn't state that there was a great disaster that caused. It makes it, when you read, it makes you think more that it was just an act of God. Now, whether this act of God was that the comet hit the iceberg, could have very well been.
I feel like God uses Mother Nature to influence change on Earth.
Yeah.
I mean, I really do. He created.
Well, and I mean,
he
there's
created
been,
nature and the volcanoes and the comets and
there's
stuff.
been
So why
multiple
wouldn't he
times.
use
I
them?
mean, if you look at Sodom and Gomorrah, it says that it was destroyed by fire and brimstone. What is fire and brimstone?
Super volcanoes.
You could look at, there was some kind of volcanic eruption, a meteor shower that made it through
solar outburst.
Yeah,
I mean,
that made it through the ozone layer that hit these two very, very corrupt cities. So there's really no explanation of how or why that these great rains came, other than the Lord wanted to basically hit a reset button. Basically, he wasn't happy with his creation at the time. So it's very possible that this is something that could have, this is what set those motions, this is what set that into play.
And personally, I believe that's what it is. You know, I believe that it's extremely possible for, you know, well, here, let me make this point first, and then I'll say that. But I believe that it's entirely possible for God to have said, you know, bring on the flood, and he knew, you know, I hit a comet on this ice cap, I'm getting my flood.
Yeah.
And like I said, the flooding was different in North America than it was in, you know, the old world.
Mm-hmm.
But regardless, it's still flooding because, like you said, water vapor. I mean, it probably would have looked like the floodgates of heaven had opened.
Well, and you mentioned a vast time of darkness. It could have been the cloud cover was so absolutely
cloud
thick
and the rain
and there's a reason when you said it dropped like 20 degrees. If a volcano erupts and the volcanic ash covers the sky, you start seeing a drop in temperature because we are not getting the direct contact with the sun that we normally would be getting. So it does make sense that the amount of water that was in the air that created the clouds could have very well been enough to block the sun out from what was our usual heat, how hot it was during this time,
and drop global temperatures
Yeah.
as a result. I mean, a lot of this is speculation, but I think there's a lot of good evidence for it, especially pertaining to the flood. I mean, I wish you guys, the listeners, could have seen in those pictures. I mean, they tell a story. It's evident that there was an extreme amount of water that is passed over North America in this time period, and personally, I believe that it attributes to the downfall of these civilizations, and we'll never know. And that's the sad thing, you know. I don't know how much you guys know about the Library of Alexandria, but when it was burned, it was told, all the stories and ancient accounts of it said that it had all the great knowledges and history of the world. I mean, who knows what we'd know, you know. There was scrolls from all over the world in that building. And when it burned up, there went potentially the human story right there. And I do think that me and Will and Josh and Tate need to sit down one day and have a more religious side talk about like some of this stuff. I feel like it'd be good to get Will in here because of, you know, his knowledge of religion. And I feel like we could have a really good talk about some of the role that some of these things have had throughout.
for sure. And I mean, dude, there's so much. A lot of the stuff that we've talked about with, especially you, Jackson, and Will, a lot of things we talked about, we could dive so much deeper into it, but just because of the confines of time and that we have, because we have to be able to keep, number one, the listener's attention.
Right.
So whenever you start going on these really long periods of time, and I think it's kind of changing because there's sometimes where I'll listen to a 3-hour long podcast.
Joe Rogan has them all the time.
Yeah.
About 3-4 hour podcasts.
So I think it's changing where people's attention span. They've done studies that, especially with TV, that once you go past the 25 to 30 minute mark, you've lost your viewers' attention.
Right.
So there's a bunch of people who are doing studies and they're trying to adjust the way television works and the way that TV shows work. But I think the coolest thing about podcasting is because we just sat here and talked about something that I did not know much about, that I've never done much thinking on. And it was the same thing with Will. There was not, I mean, I'd never thought, hey, I think Drake's the Antichrist.
Right.
So I think that podcast is an easy way to keep people's attention, because me and Tate can sit here and have a conversation about something that we feel very strongly on, and that makes other people who are listening, they start thinking about it
Right.
in ways that they wouldn't have thought about it before. And that's the unfortunate side to trying to get a hold of people and talk to people, is that you do go to a place where you can lose their attention. And hopefully by having guests on like yourself, like Jackson, like Will make it where we can keep more people's attention. We can have more discussion, because I know I don't know about Tate, but I think I can speak for him. We haven't really thought much about this particular subject.
And I had a lot of things, like, I've been telling you, Tate, for like, what, a month or so? I messaged you a little while back and was like, hey, I wouldn't mind sitting on the podcast, talk about sports or anything. But when I messaged you last week, it's because I'd been listening to this stuff, and I was like, there's one area that I can put forward that they'll probably never have another guest on who's going to talk about the same stuff.
Absolutely.
And that's something different. Like you said, if you haven't heard of it and you haven't heard of it, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners haven't heard of it, I'm just trying to bring an alternative point of perspective to something that we've been literally drilled in our heads since we were young, and even our parents, that this is the truth, believe it, or, be called a fool.
Right.
And it just goes back to the bottom line for me, is we just have to start questioning things and have a more open mind and open interpretation to these things, because in the end, when it comes to history or religion or anything, all it is man's interpretation.
Right.
Well, we're all men and we can all have different interpretations. So get well versed in different things and then form your opinion. Don't just take one person's word for it and say, they said it, it must be true.
I'll tell you the first thing that made me start questioning ancient civilization in itself, and I'm gonna recommend you read this as well. *Sapiens*. Have you ever heard of that book?
I haven't.
All right, so *Sapiens* is just a basic, and they bring facts to the table. It's a book. It's written by, I can't remember what it's written by. Hold on, let me pull it up.
So is it about like the
it's about
evolution? Like,
it's kind of like evolution, but it's how we evolved as civilization.
Man, I could go for hours. I had something. Maybe next time I come on.
This is it right here. *Sapiens*. It's by Yuval Noah Harari. Okay. Man, that I heard Joe Rogan mention it on one of his podcasts, and I downloaded it on my little Kindle Fire I got, or whatever. I don't even know what it's called. When I started reading it, dude, it fucking blew my mind. It goes from Neanderthals to the agricultural revolution to the cognitive revolution.
See,
how we grow as people, and it's amazing to see.
What do you think our education system now, the way that we learn, I think that eventually we're going to have to move away from the way that we're educating ourselves, because history, the way it's written now, is the way that whoever wrote it wanted us to remember it as. So you were talking about having a discussion with people who don't necessarily know, they've never really delved into that subject before. And I think that's what's really important about discussion and conversation, is because I'm going to have learned things differently than you have. You're going to have learned things differently than Tate has. And we come together and we can start putting out ideas and start putting out thought and start putting out just theory about how we interpret history and how we view our past. And I think that's important to note, so that you can make accurate depictions of what happened in our past. And I think if we don't do that, we're going to end up losing ourselves and losing our ability to make better judgment from what happened in in the past and in our history, or our short history here as human beings.
I agree. Like I was saying, the bottom line for me is closed-mindedness it's a drag on your wisdom. If you're closed-minded, I don't believe you get wiser. Just because you have to look at alternative views of things to fully be able to support your own point, even if you don't want to believe them.
Well, and even if you don't agree with them, it's something that you can sit down and
have a constructive conversation.
Yeah,
about.
and just not having. If you're open-minded, that doesn't necessarily mean that you believe everything that you hear. Right. That's just that you give people or something that doesn't have the exact same opinion as you do. You're open to listening to that opinion, and then you yourself can take your knowledge and your understanding of how the world works. You can sit there and you can digest that information and determine whether it's right or wrong, or if it makes sense or if it does not make sense.
Right.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Well, I think that about wraps it up.
We've been running a little while. I didn't want to keep you guys too long.
No,
I'm sure the
good.
listeners are probably like, shut up.
No, I doubt it. But anyway, we appreciate you coming on.
Hey, man, I appreciate you guys having
we'll
me.
have
I had
you
a
back
good
on.
time. Yes, sir.
We're going to have you back on.
Fun.
Exactly.
Yes, sir.
All right, listeners, make sure you subscribe on all platforms. None of that bullshit. Click the link.
Yeah,
subscribe.
give this man some love now.
Well, make sure you share this, and we're going to have Mr. Jessup on again very soon. But y'all attack the week. Have a good week, and as always, peace.
Holla.
And go Dogs.
Thanks for tuning into the B-Max Sports Podcast.
40, 1, Lindsay, 25, 20, 50, 10, 5, Lindsay, stop!
We hope you enjoyed today's episode.
I love the show, guys. You're awesome.
Listen, my whole family loves it, man.
I never miss an episode. It's the best.
We'll see you next week.
Go rock this thing, huh? Love you, man. Let's go get it.